Hello my fellow knights and warriors. This is the first video, I would say, introduction video for my series about Cry Havoc family and its rules, games, etc. This series started at the early 80s when two wargamers, Gary Chuck and Tony Webster, joined each other and decided that they want to create their own game, a wargame, which would be focused on man-to-man skirmish combat in the medieval times. Their idea was to create a game which would be easy, simple and fun to play. Something not very easy to find in these days because between 70s and 80s wargames started to become too complicated to be fun for many players. And that's why they decided to create their own game which will also have a touch of the miniatures wargame. And these are the basics of the Cry Havoc, their first game that was released between 81 and 82. The original game had two boards, one crossroads and one a village, a couple of books including a rule book, a scenario book, history background, play sheets, etc. But the most important thing of the game was that it was easy, quick to learn, fun to play and had a stunning graphics. Even the boards were pretty nice, you can tell already, but the real brilliant is the set of counters. Each character was perfectly pictured in the two or sometimes even more counters, because mounted characters have 4 counters and foot warriors have only 2 counters. And there were, apart from the characters, there were also pack mules, there were some additional things that made the game very cool, fun, easy and enjoyable. The game had a very narrative touch, since each counter was a single character. The game became a smash hit. It sold very well, not only in US or England but also in Europe. And thanks to this, there came new games of the family, like Siege, which was the first game with the graphics of well-known graphic designer Peter Dennis, or Outremer, which was focused on crusades. These games brought new concepts to the series, new rules and everything else. The game was still very popular, so there came games that used Cry Havoc rules, but brought to the new eras, like for example Samurai, that brought Cry Havoc to the feudal Japan, or Vikings that brought Cry Havoc into 10th and 9th centuries. There even came a series of the fantasy games called Dark Blades that used Cry Havoc rules to play fantasy-themed battles and campaigns and adventures with the use of fantasy creatures, spells, etc. etc. But like all the good things, Cry Havoc found its end too, and after being quite popular in 80s and at the beginning of 90s, the game met its end, or I should rather say it met the end of its first stage, because finish of the publications by Eurogames was not the end of the Cry Havoc family too, as you will soon see. Because about 20 years later, the French company Historicon brought the idea of Cry Havoc to publish their own series of the wargames. The first of them was Giscard, published in the 2013, and there came another games later that, like Dia, the Anarchy, Ager Sanguinis or Mont Gisard. The whole series was called Norman Saga, because all these games were focused on the wars, battles, adventures of Normans in the 11th or 12th centuries. Giscard, the Varangian Guard, was focused on the conquest of southern Italy. Dia was focused on the conquest of England. The Anarchy was focused on the civil war between Normans in England, and Ager Sanguinis and Mont Gisard were focused on crusades. These games used their own rules that were heavily influenced by original Cry Havoc, but added a lot of new things, making them bit more historically accurate, bit more modern, and bit more interesting. Still, the whole idea was the same. The design of the counters, design of the maps was the same, and thanks to this, these games are fully compatible with original Cry Havoc, and if you have your old Cry Havoc games, you can still use your old boards and counters and mix them with stuff from these games and use them together, and even use the rules from Norman Saga while playing Cry Havoc, or use the rules from Cry Havoc while playing Norman Saga. But I am not sure about this second option, if it will work fine, because like I said, Norman Saga brings a lot of new rules. And in my videos, I'm going to focus on Norman Saga. Why? Because original Cry Havoc is pretty easy games. I mean, I will probably made a couple of videos about Cry Havoc as well, but since Norman Saga brings a lot of elements and it has a couple of tricky rules, I think that making videos about Norman Saga makes a bit more sense. So this is a kind of introduction to the series, and now let me show you the basics of the elements that we are using in the Norman Saga. Each game comes with a couple of geomorphic boards. These boards are pretty big by themselves, and usually a scenario is played on one or two boards. Sometimes, in the rare cases, you have to use three boards, but this is not something that happens very often. You are usually playing your games on the single board or two boards, or sometimes on one or two boards with smaller boards as add-ons, because there are also sometimes very small boards that add something on the edges on the boards. There are also overlays that you have sometimes need to place on the board to show some kind of important parts of the scenery that are not included on the boards. Each game has a couple of boards, and there are additional boards that can be purchased on the publisher's site. Like I said, these boards are geomorphic, so they can be joined in any other way, and due to the fact that they use the same graphics, or mostly the same graphics, that were used in original Cry Havoc games, you can join them with Cry Havoc boards as well, and you can use Cry Havoc boards for your own scenarios. Then we have counters. There is a lot of counters in each game, because if you have a mounted character, he has 4 counters. If you have leg character, he has 2 counters, and if you have creature counter, it has 1 counter. There are long and many counters showing certain items, siege machines, pieces of scenery, etc., etc. So let's focus on counters first. When it comes to the mounted characters first, they have their 2 counters for the mounted version and 2 counters for the leg version. When it comes to the mounted counters, they picture a character on the horse, and they are 2 counters size, so they are bigger than the normal counters. They cover 2 hexes, because each hex is about 2 meters big. So if you have character on horse, he will definitely cover more than 1 hex. And now, what do we have on the counters? We have a graphics that shows our character. We have 3 basic factors. One, in the upper left corner, is the character's attack strength. It is pictured in black. Next, we have character's defense strength. It is pictured in red, and if it is encircled, like here, this means that character wears armor. As you can see, for example, he is not wearing armor, so there is no circle around his defense. And next, we have character movement points. that are in the lower left corner, and they are in blue. Next we have his name, and mounted characters also have this black triangle here that shows front of the counter. Next, we have three letters in the lower right corner that tells us some important things about the character. First letter tells us character's nationality. So for example, he has N, this means that he is Norman. Second letter tells us his movement version. So he has C, this means that he is cavalry, so he can mount a horse. For example, you can see that he has E, this means that he is infantryman, and this means that he cannot mount a horse even if there is horse without rider somewhere nearby him. And the third letter tells us his class. So K means that he's a knight. And like I said, he has two mounted counters. The first counter shows him in his full strength on the one side and his horse on the second side. So for example, if he dismounts or he's thrown off his horse, you have to flip his counter on the riderless horse. Next counter shows him being wounded, so you can see his statistics decreased, and on the other side we see his horse being killed. So if he was wounded in combat, you have to use this counter, and if he was killed, you have to if his horse was killed, you have to flip this counter on the other side. He also has two counters for himself in the foot version. So if he dismounts or is forced to dismount, you have to use these counters, and on his mounted version you have to use his riderless horse or his dead horse. Foot version has also two counters. One of them shows him in his full strength, but notice that his statistics are lower than if he is on horse. Definitely being on horse gives us some advantage. And the back of this counter shows him being stunned. This is a result of combat that might occur to the foot characters, not to the mounted character. If he is stunned on horse, he is dismounted and he has to be used in his foot version. And there is a counter for him being wounded, and on the other side we see him being dead. So if he's dead, he's no more. His dead body lays on the battlefield and can be obstacle, but that's another story. When it comes to the foot characters, they have only two counters. One of them shows them being in full strength, and its back shows him being stunned. The other counter shows him being in the wounded status, and the back shows him being dead. Creatures have only one counter. One side shows our creature alive, and the other side shows a creature being killed. So creature cannot be wounded or stunned. Creature can be only in full health or being killed. There are also a lot of counters for the certain items, siege tools or statuses. I will cover them when it comes to the good moment, because there is a lot of them and covering them now would be pointless. So these are the tools that you are using in this game. Each game comes with three types of scenarios. First of them are typical skirmish scenarios that have a couple of characters of each side on board, and they are fighting to achieve certain goals pictured in the victory conditions. These scenarios are the heart of the Norman Saga and the essence of Cry Havoc family, and they are majority of each game. Next, we have siege scenarios. Siege scenarios are basically skirmish scenarios, but with some strategic touch. They usually take a bit more time, because original Cry Havoc scenarios picture about an hour or two of the real-time battle, And siege scenarios picture a couple of days, sometimes weeks of the battle, where you use your siege engines to destroy enemy fortification. You have to take care about supplies, etc., etc. And finally, we have campaign scenarios. There are sometimes 2 or 3 scenarios in each game, and they are played on the bigger boards that picture the entire part of the country, and they have a bit more narrative touch because you are moving your units, not encounters, but units on board. You have to fight battles, make sieges, etc., and they are definitely bigger and more complicated cases. So they will need different videos to show you how they work. So each game comes with about 10, I think 12, 15 scenarios. So they are very big games. You get a couple of big boards, a lot of counters, and a lot of scenarios in each game. So each game brings a lot of fun. The only problem might be, and it is important for you to check, if any game needs additional boards, because sometimes a game needs additional boards that can be purchased separately on the publisher's site. So when you are going to purchase any of these games, make sure to check rule books that can be and scenario books that can be checked for free. And notice if you need anything else apart from the original game to play all the scenarios, because sometimes, or I even say always, you need something else along with stuff that original game contains. So that would be all when it comes to the introduction. I'm going to make a couple of videos showing each part of the rules of this series in details, hoping I will be able to give you a good look on the Norman Saga family, and you will be able to find if you enjoy this series or not. So if you will have any questions regarding this video or Cry Havoc or Norman Saga in general, you are much welcome to post them in the comments.